Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. This is a Care Collab video. I'm joining in with the group of people doing the Care Collabs for Aerangis mystacidii. Before we start, I'd just like to... Out here, I'm sure people think that most of the plants are growing in similar conditions. Well, they're actually not. Some of their little microclimates are very carefully contrived, and mystacidii is one of them, because I've got 3 Aerangis, and believe it or not, mystacidii is used to shade the other 2. I'll show you what I mean. So they live up here. So this is in the warmer area, although I think this one might need to be a... Well, I'm blowed. Sorry, sidetracked. Oh, we'll have to have that down. I do believe that's a flower spike, if it hasn't blasted. Well, I'm blowed. I'll have to put a pop-up for the name of that one, because I can never remember it. It's about 8 foot long. I think it ends in rhodosticta or something or other, but this is just basically a handful of seedlings that have been mounted together, so it's a group of plants, not a single one. But that does look like a flower spike. Well, goodness me, whether that's actually going to form buds and bloom or not, I don't know. It still looks like a set of young plants to me. And then the other one I've got, which is also shaded, is the fastuosa. That's growing on. It's a relatively young plant, as yet unbloomed, but I would expect it to bloom next year. Probably not this year now, but it's pushed out quite a few new roots lately. So that's 2 out of the 3. And if you look up there, above you can see a beam, yeah? So during the midday sun, when the sun's at its strongest, all 3 of these plants are under that piece of wood, yeah? It's a tiny little microclimate. And then the light comes in mainly from above, and later in the day it's coming in through there, earlier in the day through here. Yeah? When it's coming in through there, I don't want these 2 getting the brightest light, so mystacidii sits above them and provides a little bit of extra shade. Right, so that out of the way, let's get the article down. Now, I watered these earlier today, and that was a big surprise because the last couple of times these have been watered with the sprayer, and this is what happens when you use a sprayer and you don't get your plants down. Little spikes creep up on you. So we are going to get some blooms. That will be a first time bloomer for me. This is my 2nd plant. I lost the other one. Basically, I had some Aerangis, and they were on a type of oak bark, not cork, and it started to rot and I was losing some roots, so I redid all 3 of them, and all 3 of them just collapsed and died. So and one of them was mystacidii. So this is a replacement. Now I must admit I thought this plant was a bit too young to bloom, but it's going to have a go. Now this plant, where can I put it where it's... So I haven't got much light in here today. Right, so this plant has 2 lives, because it's found in 2 quite distinct habitats, and they're quite different, and it does very well in both of them, which means to me it's pretty tolerant. Now, one habitat that it likes a lot is river ravines. These are deep cuttings with a river in the bottom, quite steep slopes, forested slopes. Yeah, and it's often found on little twigs hanging over the water, so down low in those ravines. That would be quite a humid atmosphere, but where those ravines occur, a lot of the trees are deciduous. Not all, but quite a few are deciduous. That's important. And then another type of environment that it likes is evergreen forests, where the canopy stays put. Evergreen, yeah? And therefore would be quite heavily shaded all year round. So it's two quite different environments. And also, it can grow quite cool, but it can also grow in very warm conditions. So it's quite tolerant, really, of the sort of thing it likes. But given those two environments, let's have a think about the effect it would have. Let's take the river ravines and the twiggy sort of overhanging the water type environments with quite a few deciduous trees. Well, it's growing more like a dendrobium in that environment because it's going to get a bright winter. And often in those environments, there is quite a dry spell for that period, yeah? So it wouldn't get as much water, it still get its humidity off the river, yeah? And when it rains, obviously it gathers onto the rocks in the sides of the ravines and everything, so it's quite a humid atmosphere, but it would be drier in winter and brighter in winter. The evergreen forests tend to be wet, or they wouldn't be evergreen, would they? So they're going to be humid and wet. And if they're evergreen, they're going to be warm. You don't tend to get evergreen forests that are cool unless they're pine forests, and we're not talking that, we're talking jungle evergreen here. Basically, this comes from the south and southwest countries of mainland Africa. Unlike quite a lot of the Aerangis that are endemic to Madagascar and the other two islands hanging out the top, which I can never remember the name of. But there are a lot of Aerangis that are only found on Madagascar. But this is common in places like lots and lots of plants, you know, like growing like a weed, as they say. So in places, this is a very common plant found in the wild. Now, back to those two environments, because you get what has been described by non-knowledgeable people as two different plants, because the plants that grow in the evergreen forests tend to have quite dark leaves and they're very large in comparison to those that grow in the river ravines where there's a lot more deciduous trees and they get much brighter light in the winter, and they tend to be quite a bit smaller with paler leaves. And to all intents and purposes, these look like two entirely different plants until they bloom. And the thing that doesn't change is the size of the blooms and the colour. That stays the same. So that's the giveaway. But they were thought of as two separate species for some time. Obviously, in more modern times that wouldn't happen because they do DNA checks and everything, and that would sort it out once and for all. And when they do that, they'd probably change its name anyway. Anyway, so this is quite temperature tolerant. It will go down to quite low temperatures in the winter, but if yours has to do that because you've got no choice, then I suggest you keep it much, much drier than others might if they've got warmer winter temperatures. But you know, you can choose two ways of looking after this. You can choose to keep it in quite bright light, not sun, pretty bright light. And as such, it will probably grow smaller leaves, and you can give it a brighter winter semi-rest. I'm not going to say rest it, because if these stay dry too long, they will start to shrivel and you could lose leaves, so you've got to go careful. And when you've got something that hasn't got pseudobulbs or canes, by the time you've noticed it's shriveling, you've lost your leaves, so go careful. These shouldn't stay dry for any length of time, even in the winter, but they can be drier in winter. Whereas if you're going to grow it like the tropical rainforest version of this plant, then you shouldn't let it cool down in winter, you shouldn't give it bright light, and you should keep it growing year round. But you need to have the temperature range to be able to do that, yeah? Sort of mixing the two probably isn't the best of ideas. To grow it hot, steamy and shady through the summer and then to stick it in the bright and the cold for the winter probably would be a shock to the plant. So anyway, so choices. You know, you can grow it warm, you can grow it cooler. Most people are going to hit the middle and grow it intermediate. And most people probably wouldn't let it get too cold in the winter. I certainly don't. My winter temperatures don't do this any harm at all. So yeah, my first spike. I don't know how many buds it's going to have. It looks like at least 3, maybe 4. We shall see. Relative to the plant size, the blooms are quite a reasonable size. They're not giant by any means. So none of the Aerangis have giant blooms, but some are quite a bit bigger than others. My roots have grown quite a bit this season. Got one heading off around the back, several across the top, so there's quite a few growing tips. And I keep the centre, near the centre of the plant, not the base of the plant. I would seriously recommend you don't bury the base of the plant in moss. They are prone to rotting. So keep the base of the plant clear, but cover some of your roots and give them something to get into so that they hydrate well. Like if you look at the amount of moss I've got, it's not a lot. This whole root area over here hasn't got moss on it, but you can see that it still hydrates those roots when watered. You tend to find new roots don't. So the new bits stay white even when they've been watered. If you put it into soak, they would eventually go green, but I don't like getting mine that wet. So there we go. I'm pleased to see that bloom for the first time, because the other one I had was a much bigger plant, much bigger leaves, stronger looking plant before I lost it, and it never bloomed. But as I said, this one I'm choosing to go for quite bright light without being silly. And the other thing I always forget to say, which quite honestly I shouldn't have to say because you should take it as read, they like good airflow. Shouldn't have to keep saying that all the time, you know. It's taken as read that orchids like movement in the air. They don't like a force-8 gale, you know, they don't like their wig blowing off, you know. But if you can see the leaves very gently moving every now and again, that's probably about right. If the leaves are bent over or facing one way, too much. But they do like air movement. They also like good humidity, but the ones that would be found in the tropical rainforests, effectively, the evergreen rainforests, would get very high humidity because they're very wet forests. There's a lot of rain, that type of environment. But those growing in the river ravines have got a drier environment all round, so their humidity's not as high. But I wouldn't recommend growing them in drier air. They do better if the air is reasonably humid, slightly moving, which it will be when I turn the fan back on. And go steady with your light. They will take, mystacidii will take quite bright light, but I wouldn't ever get that in the sun. That's me, you know. I mean, if other people have managed to get it into morning sun or evening sun and it does okay, that's fine, but I'm not risking mine. Well, if you think about it in here, nothing gets sun, does it? Because there's shade netting on every part. Even this glass round here that hasn't got any shading on it has still got that white paint stuff on the outside which filters it. So yeah, Aerangis mystacidii. I don't have plans to get any more Aerangis. 3 is more than enough for me, and they are very different. As I say, this one looks like a fastuosa, looks like a little phalaenopsis and has those leathery type leaves, and it does look quite like a phalaenopsis. This is a relatively new acquisition. These are quite thin, wispy leaves, basically. I don't know how big these plants are going to get, and I don't know whether that spike's going to bloom. And then you've got the mystacidii, which we've looked at, where you've got the patterning on the leaves. And that can be quite pronounced at times. It almost looks like a child has scribbled on it with a pen. It just looks like wavy lines of a darker colour. They're not spots, they're not blotches. They're like veins, but they don't follow the path of veins. So as I said, to me it just looks like somebody scribbled on them. And they went over the edges in places. Naughty. Yeah. Right, there we go. So that's that one done. And somewhere at the beginning of the video I'm going to have to find a break, because I forgot to leave a gap to actually put the channels So I'll break the video and put a pop-up saying, and these are the channels. And we'll do the In a Galaxy Far, Far Away stuff and all that. There's actually quite a few channels to go this time. In addition to that, the channels will be in the description, so that you can always go and find them there. And yeah, see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.